Roughly 8,000 years ago, someone painted a picture of people swimming inside a cave in the Sahara Desert. No one has fully explained how swimmers ended up on a wall in what is now the largest hot desert on the planet, a place that averages less than 1 inch of rainfall a year. The cave sits on the Gilf Kebir plateau in southwestern Egypt, a sandstone highland closer to Libya than to the Nile, surrounded on every side by nothing but rock and dune. It contains not just swimmers, but painted cattle, hunters, and what appear to be hippos, animals that need permanent standing water to survive. Standing water that has not existed anywhere near this plateau for thousands of years. That's just the opening fact. Over the next several minutes, we'll walk through 10 documented pieces of evidence that the Sahara was once green, and close with the detail that most casual retellings of this story leave out entirely. The reason climate scientists say it may already be overdue to happen again. The cave is officially known as the Cave of Swimmers, and it was documented in 1933 by the Hungarian explorer and aviator Laszlo Almásy, whose desert expeditions later inspired fictionalized accounts of the region. What he found wasn't a single painting, but a gallery. Dozens of human figures rendered in ochre and red pigment, some clearly mid-swim, arms bent at the elbow in a stroke position, frozen mid-motion for thousands of years on rock that has not touched rainfall in living memory. Almásy himself was reportedly startled by the scene, since the surrounding landscape, even in the 1930s, was already severe desert. Researchers who later studied the surrounding rock art placed the swimming figures within the same broad window as a far larger transformation of the region, a period now called the African Humid Period. That's the label. What it actually describes is stranger than the name suggests. The swimmers were not even the strangest thing waiting in that stretch of desert. A few miles from the Cave of Swimmers sits a second, larger gallery known as the Cave of Beasts, rediscovered by a German and Egyptian survey team in the early 2000s. Its walls hold several thousand painted and engraved figures packed across the rock in dense, overlapping layers. Herders, animals, and, most unsettling of all, a cluster of human-like figures painted without heads. No accepted explanation exists for why an entire group of figures was deliberately painted headless, and researchers studying the site have floated ritual meaning, storytelling convention, and simple artistic style as competing guesses without settling on one. Here's what we actually know, underneath the mystery of the paintings themselves. Between roughly 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, the region we call the Sahara was not desert at all. It held permanent lakes, seasonal rivers, and enough grassland to support cattle herding across an area now covered by dunes in Egypt, Libya, Chad, and Niger. Pollen records, ancient shorelines, and buried river channels, visible today only through satellite radar that can see beneath the sand, all point to the same conclusion. And if that's true, it raises a question worth sitting with. The eternal desert most of us were taught to picture as a fixed feature of the planet may really just be wherever the Sahara happened to be sitting in a climate cycle at the moment humans started writing things down. Some geographers would push back hard on that framing, and honestly, it's worth arguing out in the comments. Today, the interior of the Sahara is one of the driest places measured anywhere on the surface of the Earth, with some weather stations recording close to 0 measurable rainfall across an entire year. Sand dunes now bury river channels that once ran wide enough to carry seasonal floodwater toward ancient lake basins. The largest of those basins, sometimes called Lake Megachad by researchers who study it, is estimated to have covered an area larger than several American states bordering the Great Lakes combined, at its peak extent. A genuine inland sea, sitting where cracked earth and dunes now stretch to the horizon. A lake that size does not vanish quietly. So what actually happened to it? Part of the answer showed up not in Egypt, but nearly 1,000 miles west, in the Tenere Desert of Niger, at a site now known as Gobero. Paleontologist Paul Sereno and his team, searching the dunes for dinosaur fossils, instead uncovered something else entirely. A burial ground containing human skeletons, harpoon points, and the bones of large fish and crocodiles, all preserved in what had once been the shoreline of a freshwater lake. The findings, published in 2008, revealed burials from two distinct populations separated by centuries. One associated with hunting and fishing, a later one associated with cattle herding. Evidence that people didn't just pass through the Green Sahara, they lived there, generation after generation, raising children and burying their dead beside open water. If a detail like that, a fishing community found buried under a modern-day desert, crocodile bones lying a stone's throw from bone-dry dunes, genuinely grabs you, this is exactly the kind of documented anomaly this channel exists to dig into, so it's worth sticking around for what's still ahead. So what turns a lake-filled savanna into the driest desert on the planet? The leading hypothesis centers on a slow wobble in the Earth's rotation called axial precession, a cycle that takes roughly 21,000 years to complete. Climatologist John Kutzbach was among the first to model how this wobble shifts the timing of the Northern Hemisphere's closest approach to the sun, which in turn strengthens or weakens the West African monsoon that pulls rain deep into the continent. When the monsoon was strong, rain reached far past where it does today, feeding the lakes at Gobero and the wetlands surrounding the Gilf Kebir. When the wobble shifted the geometry again, the rain retreated, the lakes shrank, the grasslands thinned into scrub, and the scrub thinned into the sand we picture today. That should have settled the question. It didn't. Paleoclimatologist deMenocal and colleagues studied dust layers preserved in marine sediment cores off the coast of West Africa and found evidence that in some records, the shift from green to arid happened remarkably fast, over a few centuries rather than gradually over thousands of years. Other researchers, working from lake and pollen records inland, argue the transition was patchier, with some regions drying quickly while isolated refuges held on far longer. Exactly why some communities lost their water within a few generations, while others held on for centuries longer, has never been fully resolved. And the two camps still disagree, sometimes sharply, on how abrupt the real ending truly was. Here's the detail that doesn't fit the popular version of this story. This wasn't the only Green Sahara, and it likely won't be the last. Dust records pulled from deep-sea cores off the African coast show repeated cycles of humid and arid Sahara stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, each one lining up with the same 21,000-year wobble. That means the Green Sahara people reference when talking about the Cave of Swimmers wasn't a one-time fluke of climate history. It was simply the most recent occurrence of something that has happened dozens of times before humans existed to paint any of it on a cave wall. And this is where the story turns genuinely strange. If the precession cycle is the real driver, simple orbital math suggests the Sahara is not locked indefinitely into its current arid state. Some climate researchers argue the region is approaching, or may already be entering, the window where the natural cycle would begin nudging it back toward wetter conditions. Officially, the explanation is simple. The wobble shifts the monsoon shifts the rainfall shifts the vegetation. The problem is that this entire cycle evolved without a modern atmosphere carrying additional greenhouse gases on top of it. And no one has been able to fully model what happens when a rhythm that old collides with a warming signal moving on a timescale of decades rather than millennia. Some early modeling suggests added heat could help revive monsoon rains over the Sahara. Other models suggest the opposite, that a disrupted global circulation could suppress the very rains the precession cycle is supposed to deliver. Whether the Sahara's next green period arrives on schedule, arrives early, gets delayed, or gets altered entirely by forces the Cave of Swimmers painters could never have imagined, is a question no one currently has a confident answer to. And it may be the single strangest unresolved detail in this whole story. So return, for a moment, to that cave on the Gilf Kebir plateau, to the painted figures with their arms bent mid-stroke, holding a motion no one nearby has been able to make in thousands of years. What's documented is not in dispute. The Sahara held lakes, rivers, and grassland within the last 11,000 years, supported cattle-herding communities at sites from Egypt to Niger, and dried through a process tied to a measurable 21,000-year wobble in the Earth's rotation. What remains genuinely unresolved is the exact pace of that ending in any given place. why some figures on that second cave's wall were left without heads, and, more pressingly than either, what happens the next time the cycle turns, now that the planet's atmosphere is nothing like the one those painters lived under? The people who painted swimmers on a desert wall left behind proof that the ground under our feet is not as permanent as it looks. The Sahara is less a fixed place than a temporary setting on a very slow-moving dial. Somewhere on that dial, the setting is due to change again, and no one currently knows exactly what that change will look like, or whether anyone standing there will recognize it as the same shift the swimmers once lived through.